Hey everyone, Scott Hansen here from NFL Red Zone. I hope you're checking out 1 hour of 5 Yard Rush, one of the best podcasts on NFL football in the UK.
Here we are, Rush Nation, a day later than usual, but I promised you this would be worth the wait. We've got an absolutely unbelievable guest. I guess for this season, he's a frenemy. But after that, he will be a surefire friend. No, it's always taken with positivity. And before I introduce him, as always, I've just got to do the business in terms of thanking our sponsors. And this show is brought to you by Manscaped, who is the best in men's below-the-waist grooming. They are the champions of the world in that regard, and they offer precision-engineered tools for your family jewels. Manscaped have just launched, as I keep telling you, the Lawnmower 4.0 across Europe. It's absolutely brilliant. As I keep saying, I've got mine. It honestly couldn't do without it. And it is bar none the best that money can buy. And with the code 5YARD, you can get 20% off and worldwide free shipping at manscaped.com. That's just with the code 5YARD. Enough about that. Let's bring on today's guest. As I mentioned, he is a bit of a frenemy. We are against each other in the Scott Fish Bowl this year. And I guess he's playing for second in that division, in the Who division, which is the best division of all. But he is a fantasy football analyst for Yahoo Fantasy since 2007. He's also won multiple awards for accuracy amongst football and baseball, and he is, more importantly, president of the FSWA. I knew I was going to mess that one up. Andy Behrens, thank you for jumping across the pond and joining me on 5 Yard Rush. How are you, sir?
Of course, I'm great. Thank you for having me. It's fun to finally do this. We were talking about it a little bit. I feel like, Scott Fish Bowl is such a large, sprawling league that it's very difficult to develop any individual rivalries, right? You're essentially going up against, 1,000 plus people. It's hard. It's low probability. It's just really fun.
1,920 people this year. So bigger than ever. And you're right. But I think what I love about it, I say it in jest, I don't really mean it, because it is about the friendships and the people that you get to meet and speak to. And I know our division was very lively in the chat. A few of us jumped on and had a good chat when the draft was going on. I thought it was a really good draft. It went at a nice pace. It wasn't too rushed. It wasn't slow. I didn't feel there was anybody timing. I don't think there was a timeout as far as I can recall. I felt like everyone was pretty active.
I have now gone, I want to say I've gone back to back now in Scott Fish Bowls, taking no time for any of my picks, which is not like strategically necessarily the best thing to do, right? But it always, I just feel it's the most considerate thing I can possibly do. Like maybe I should give myself 4 hours for every choice just to see if any injury information breaks in the middle of the damn summer. But I just never do it. And then I get hung up on the idea of preserving the perfect 0-second draft, right? So like I've done that 2 years in a row. It's the only thing I'll ever win in Fish Bowl, so I'm proud of that.
You say that your team's pretty loaded this year. Do you know what? I thought it was a very good draft, and there wasn't a lot of value to be had. I think there was a lot of very, very smart people in our division. Michael Golden was in there, and obviously his daughters are quite infamous in the community. I had his daughter last year, Hope, who was 12, didn't even have a Twitter account because of her age. And there's us in the chat for the first half a draft. We didn't know her age or who she was. And we're like, God, Hope's taking forever. Like, what's going on? All my picks were on auto pick because I was picking through the night. Didn't make a live pick. And yeah, we were sitting there going like, oh, there's always one that just doesn't turn up. And then we find out, oh, well, she's 12. That's why she doesn't have a Twitter.
Well, this year, especially with the naming of the divisions after bands, some of which are terrible and some of which are among the greatest that have ever existed. It's kind of self-selecting, right? Like we were always going to have a really difficult division because we all chose the Who, right? So we all have taste. We're all knowledgeable to a certain greater extent than most of the people participating in this thing. So yeah, of course it's a buzzsaw.
Yeah, absolutely. But like, I thought it was a great draft. A lot of great people. We'll get onto that in a second. Let's talk a little bit about you for folks maybe across the pond here who don't know so much about how you started. 2007 was the start of the international games here in the UK. So for those that were watching the games or not watching the games before then, how did you get to Yahoo? How did you get into football, talking about fantasy football and doing this for a living? How did you get your start?
Yeah, I mean, I've been a football fan. I don't remember my life without being a football fan, right?
Mm.
It's just from the time I was super young. I started playing fantasy in the early '90s. I'm frighteningly old. Started playing fantasy in the early '90s, shortly after college, like first job situation, and I became particularly obsessed with it because I want to say that for the first 4 years of my main league, I and it was a workplace league, and we were all kind of competitive in the workplace anyway, and then there was fantasy layered on top of that, right? And I would make it to the championship of that league reliably each of the first 4 years, and I lost in spectacular fashion and sometimes super improbable fashion in each of those championships, and it just made me absolutely totally obsessive, where I was gonna I just needed to master the game, right? I just needed to get over that. And I think that if I'd just won that first league, I think I probably would have decided, okay, I'm great at this. I don't need to. I have nothing left to prove here, right? Yeah, yeah. But I got really into it, and then eventually I left that job and I started freelance writing about sports. And this is like to the 1999, 2000, 2001-ish era. The internet is sort of just a thing, and
Mm.
it's only then allowing opportunities for people like me who didn't necessarily have connections in journalism, really, to find a space to write. And so I was able to, early on, I caught on, and I did some I was writing for Page 3 and Page 2 at ESPN for a little while, just doing like freelance things on the sort of mainstream sports side. And fantasy was just another way to write about sports, right? So that's kind of how I got into it. I was already playing it. I wanted to sort of proselytize on behalf of fantasy because it was like anybody, at the time it was kind of niche, right? It was like
Mm.
you were a fantasy geek, you were like this little forgotten corner of the sports world if you were into fantasy. And then of course that flipped over time because everybody who plays it immediately recognizes that, oh, this is super instructive, this is making me a much more knowledgeable fan. And whereas I just used to be some meathead Chicago Bears fan yelling at the TV, now I know things about the other team. Now I know about offensive schemes that are being run around the league. I know who's coaching this week's opponent. So it makes you such a knowledgeable fan that once you sort of dip a toe in, nobody ever quits, right? Like you might say, okay, I have to pare down the leagues from like 8 to 4 or something like that, but nobody ever just says that's it, I can't handle fantasy football, because it just makes a better fan in every possible way. So I was doing early on, I was writing some fantasy for ESPN, and then Brad Evans and Brandon Funston interviewed me at a pizza place in Chicago in 2007, and no, it was probably 2006, and then hired me in 2007, and there I've been ever since.
Amazing. I think you said it all there for fans in the UK, because it is about that knowledgeable. I say to people all the time, I speak to people so frequently here in the UK who are just picking up the game, or have been watching it for the last year or two, or they've been taken to a game by a friend over here. And we're so lucky that we get games here in the UK, that there is that opportunity to always take someone who's never been, to get them involved.
Mm-hmm.
And people ask me, like, how do I get more involved? It's like, fantasy's the way to do it. You could watch a million games, but you don't know what you're looking for. With fantasy, at least you'll always have a reason to want to delve in more, because you'll have a vested interest, i.e. your team, and you'll know what to look for. It's like you said, and we get the same with people who come to me all the time. How do you pick your team? I mean, I was lucky. I lived in the US. I lived near Tampa. I was in Orlando. It was like they're more the Jaguars. It was like, it was always going to be Tampa. They were the team that was always on. So it kind of made sense. But I say to people, just pick a team based on your fantasy players. Like pick the
Yeah.
whoever you're supporting for on Sunday, that could be your team. And if you draft loads of Bengals, be a Bengals fan. If you're drafting loads of Bears, be a Bears fan. Oh, I don't know why you'd be drafting loads of Bears, but
I was just gonna say I don't really know either.
I'm
I
kidding.
can't defend that.
I'm one of the few that is like a real David Montgomery truther. I feel like I have to go. In fact, I went on the Fantasy Pros podcast about 10 or so days ago and talked about why David Montgomery is a league winner this year. Because I just feel like you've got to. Like someone's got to be out there because he does reliably accumulate points. And especially with the schedule. And the Bears schedule coming in, fantasy football's really, really good. And especially for David
Montgomery is actually, not that you want to get sidetracked on this, but he's the rare case of the fantasy community sort of generally showing some restraint, right? Like we're all sort of writing the piece at the end of last season, going into this summer about how, hey, watch out, there could be a trap with David Montgomery because he was, he thrived against this incredibly easy late season schedule they had. Maybe he's not going to have the same set of circumstances this year. And we've not made him like an end of round one. Like I feel like 10 years ago, coming off of last year, perhaps he would have been selected at the end of round one, early round two, and it's just not happening. We're showing a little bit of restraint. People understand the few negatives there, and they appreciate the player. And like he's one of the most appropriately priced players in the draft pool, and I didn't think we'd be here.
No, yeah, but I'm also one of those. I get to the point where you've the first 12, 13 running backs are off the board. He's still there. I'm thinking he's an easy ad for me at that point. Like it's just like I get to that point. I'm there. I'm happy. I think I took him in a draft this week in the middle of the second because it just felt that I looked at where I was drafting, where I was going to be next, and thought he's not going to make it. And I really want that anchor of having him because, especially as my second running back off the board, I'm more than happy to have him there because he's going to return that investment. But yeah, you mentioned sidetrack. We'll get back onto Dave Montgomery and others a bit. In terms of for you, obviously you've been on this amazing career path and journey, and you've been with Yahoo Fantasy for so long, and also president of the FSWA, which is something. It's just incredible. I'm part of the organization. It's just amazing that you do that. How do you balance both roles? How do you balance doing what you do full time with Yahoo and then being the president of the FSWA?
Well, most of the work involved in FSWA, and you remember, so we don't exactly have deep pockets, right? We're not like some cash rich organization. You basically pay you pay dues one time and never again, and so we're not, we're design on a dime, sort of almost everything we do. But most of the work of it is toward the end of the NFL season, which is really unfortunate because October hits and then we have to ramp up the awards process behind the scenes, which is really a phenomenal volunteer effort on behalf of a small number of people. But that's really most of the work. So there's not a whole lot that I have to do other than some behind the scenes administrative stuff that goes on through the summer. But then we get into, it's unfortunate, like the money weeks in fantasy leagues. I'm neck deep in the awards process and trying to answer questions for people. And it's been really gratifying just in the time that I've been associated with the FSWA. The number of people that are now nominating for awards has spiked to a crazy level. And the whole thing started years ago, like 2005-ish. Basically because fantasy writing at that moment was, and think of the people that were doing it then. It's, it was Matt Berry, it's Bob Harris, it's Chris Harris, it's like some people who are like real titans in the business. That was some of the best sports writing that was out there on the NFL, right? And it just wasn't getting recognized because fantasy was still viewed as this sort of niche thing. But it was really quality stuff. So the organization started as a way to spotlight all that good work that was out there, and now it's just mushroomed into this, like the number of things that we can't recognize that are incredible each year are just, it's mind-blowing. You wish you could have I don't know, we expand the award categories every few years, and we'll be looking to add more in the next couple of years because it's just so hard to recognize all the great work that goes on in the industry.
Yeah, and it is phenomenal, and I always make a point to read everything that gets shortlisted and nominated, and it's just unbelievable because some of these articles are just ones that you would never know were out there, and I think that's what I appreciate more than anything as a member and someone who has access to be able to read that content and get smart off the back of it as well. And
Another thing I'll say about the FSWA's process in support, and this is a process that I basically inherited, so I claim no credit for it, but that, one thing you'll notice are the finalists for all of our awards are a total mix of major platforms and people that you're learning about for the first time, right? Like they're people who've started their own sites within 18 months who become finalists for the awards, and they might be in a category with Brad Evans, or they might be in a category with, JJ Zacharias, and you're in there with like heavy hitters in the industry. It is a truly blind judging process behind the scenes. Nobody's like, rubber stamping the ESPN submissions or the CBS submissions or Yahoo or whatever and just advancing them to the final. Like none of that is happening. The whole pain of the process is in erasing site names and individual names and things like that, and making sure that we have a group of judges who are not considering the sources.
Yeah, and it does show. My good friend Brian Drake, he was nominated for one last year with his amazing piece about being a dad and a fantasy writer, which I just loved, and it resonated so much, especially as I was a new dad at the time. And yeah, that's why I love it. It's things like that. I mean, I've read that piece before it was submitted, but it was great to see, him get that recognition. And just a final thing before we move on to a little bit of SFB 11 talk, because we have to talk a little bit more about it. What advice would you give to people listening here right now? I like to ask this question to anybody who is, successful as you are in terms of wanting to follow that passion, and it could be about sports or model trains or just anything. What advice would you give to anybody wanting to get started and follow their passion?
Well, one of the really fortunate things about and one of the best things about the fantasy community on pretty much every social platform is that, especially like the younger people who are fairly new to the industry, it's a super supportive community. And when, obviously when I broke into it, social media barely a thing, and the internet barely a thing when I started, freelance sports writing and all that. So there's so few barriers to entry now and to inserting yourself into the community of fantasy analysts sort of at large, right? And there's so few barriers to actually creating content if you want to dedicate the time to doing it, whether it's, podcast, video, whatnot. I mean, you just throw yourself into it, and as long as you're, I feel like as long as you have an entertaining voice, you have something interesting to say, and you relate well to other members in the community, you're going to find people who will amplify your voice, and you'll get noticed. And I'm just thinking about the people that we've hired and we've sort of brought in as freelancers to the Yahoo team over the last couple of years. Like they just, at some point, just, I'm thinking about like Troy King. At some point, Troy just decided, I've got this real job that pays bills, and I'm really into football, and I'm really into fantasy football, and I'm going to write about this, and I'm going to see how far I can take it. And, within a year, I don't know, like I was only vaguely aware of Troy, like, a little over 12 months ago, and now he's he's just one of my favorite online friends, and he's been doing a bunch of stuff for Yahoo, and he's got a piece today, and it's just not that, not to say that it's not that difficult to break in, but there's so few impediments if you're highly motivated to do it.
Yeah, I think that's so true, because it's as you say, 20 years ago, this didn't exist, right? We were still going to Barnes and Noble, to read magazines about fantasy football, because the online space wasn't there. And now anyone can pick up, I speak to people all the time and go, how do you start a podcast? It's easy. You buy a headset or you buy a microphone, cost you 40, 50 pounds. I'll tell you where you can get free editing software, where you can load your podcast for free, where it will push to all the places. You don't have to spend a lot of money to get started, and then you just talk. And it's such an easy barrier, as you say, just to do it. And you know what? The hardest thing is putting yourself out there. That's the hardest thing. But I always say to people, the first 10, 15, 20 episodes are awful. Like, you'll never want to listen to them again because they're that bad. But that's fine. That is the process. As long as you take away from it and you continue to grow and learn and speak to people, that's the biggest thing. But do you know what? Even if you never make a dime, as long as you're enjoying doing it, that's all that matters.
It is funny how much the job has changed, because when I was hired at Yahoo in 2007, like, my job was 4 columns a week. Like, you're just going to write 4 columns a week. And then very quickly it was like, oh, we have advertisers who are interested in video, and we've got to figure out a way to like produce video. And there's something I'd never done or ever contemplated doing. I just thought I was going to be like, a voice behind the scenes that nobody ever had to see. And now it's just like, you have to achieve a certain proficiency on radio, on pod, on video. Like, it's just become every possible medium, which is fun. But again, as you say, it's not, there are costs involved, but it's not like you need to put together an investor group to start a podcast or anything like that. The equipment is relatively affordable, and it is a thing that you can dive into, and you happen to be diving into a community that is very supportive of its own.
Yeah, there are literally thousands of people on Twitter that will follow, support. You can DM for advice. I couldn't agree with that more. They're just an amazing bunch of people who are so supportive and friendly. Yes, there's always the occasional thing that people fall out over, and I think that's true of any family. But I think, you couldn't ask for a better community to want to break into than the fantasy community, because of the fact that, do you know what? Even if, let's say, your dream ambition is to be what you're doing, Andy, and to take your job one day when you decide you don't want it anymore, it's going to be hard enough. But if you make friends, like for me, this is just about meeting people. It's just meeting people, sharing experiences. Your life is going to be so much more full as a result of all the people that you can just talk to about the obsession and the sickness that we have, that's fantasy football. And I know that I can go and have a conversation tonight with 100 people if I want to, or 100 different people, and have a great night. You don't need to spend any money. You don't need to go anywhere. You can just have a great night delving into your obsession and passion, which is, I think, if you can do that, you're always going to be successful no matter what happens. A little bit on SFB 11. So we mentioned we're in the same division, tough division. I have to ask you this question because I've got you here. I want to know your thinking on the kicker turn, because you went kicker. Was it the 14th and 15th turn? I think
that sounds right. It
was 14, 15. Yeah, I'm sure it was that sort of range where you were picking, because you're picking out of the one spot. So I need to understand this thinking as to why you went kicker in the Scott Fishbowl. Was it just to jump into the change of format, or was it just there was a strategic element behind it?
Yeah, first of all, I want to lean into the format and support it fully, because it had gone from being a joke on Twitter to something that I was semi-serious about. Like, I like the idea of kickers in flex spots. I like it a lot. And I will also say that I love the scoring that Scott has set up, which is super tricky. Because if you'll notice, and you probably did this in prep for the draft, like the top kickers in this scoring format, and it's hugely driven by length of field goal, right? Like, there's big penalties for misses, but it's hugely driven by length of field goal. And obviously, if you're drafting kickers, like, it's not, people like to say it's random, but it is entirely not random. I mean, you want to chase the highest scoring offenses, and there are a handful of kickers that are more accurate from distance than others. So there are kickers that we can identify. They're going to be good in this format. But the great thing that Scott did is he created a scoring system where, man, these guys sync up so well with many of the extremely high variance, like, wide receivers that you would otherwise be plugging into a flex spot, right? So if you look at how my two kickers are like Younghoe Koo and Justin Tucker, and if you look at how they would have scored last year, it's just perfectly in sync with like the Will Fullers and the Marquise Browns and these guys, where they're going to have 2 or 3 blow up weeks, and they're going to have 10 weeks of like 3 catches for 35 yards that don't help you at all. And so it forces this tricky decision of do you want to take what I perceive as a pretty steady 9 to 12 points for my kickers, or do I want to chase these high upside guys, most of whom fall flat on their face, right? So so I dove into the kickers with what I considered the two best or two of the best in this format. I had no idea when people would first take them either, and I was
No.
seeing wildly different results from different leagues, right? Based on usually if there was a big kicker enthusiast in some leagues, somebody would have less discipline than I did. Like I felt like I waited pretty long.
Yeah.
And I'd already gotten a handful of people that I felt pretty strongly about. So I actually think I've seen the argument out there that you should have just ignored kicker entirely and just take big swings all the time. Get your guys, and then eventually, if you need to, you can drop them for lesser kickers. I went with kickers who I think are going to be steady right out of the gates, who are going to be really good. And then I can figure out which of those high upside guys that because I still have guys that I seem to have all over the place. De'Ami Brown, I think, is on my roster in Fishbowl. There's just a handful of guys that I think might pop. And but now I don't have to play them in week 1, right? Like now I can just wait and see, because I know I've got Justin Tucker, who's going to give me, I don't know, 10, 12 points in the opening weeks. And I feel pretty confident about that. And if I happen to hit on any flyers, then fine, I can start them over a Young Wei Koo or something like that. But I like having sort of a money in the bank kicker in one of those flex spots. And I just adore that Scott added it as a flex.
I'm with you. And I did something similar. I went later than you did, but I got Blankenship and Sanders for exactly that reason.
Mm-hmm.
And when you can take big swings, but actually I like to have a degree with injuries. For example, last year my roster got decimated with injuries. Kickers don't really get injured. You get the odd one, but you know what? You can plug one in. It's like, yeah, okay, I might get 10 points this week, 8 points, 9 points out of my kicker. But I know that when all my injuries are settling in and coming in, I've got someone I can just plug in and rely on. And I did the same as you. I took 2 kickers. I went later, and probably didn't get the same upside and high return, but I'm quite happy with Blankenship and Sanders for that reason. I know I've got guys who, when everything goes Pete Tong and there's guys on IR and I'm struggling about who to pick up, and there's no one on the waiver wire, because by week 7 there really isn't anyone on the waiver wire.
Yep.
You've got guys you can just plug in and they can get you through. And I think they're going to be crucial end of the regular season in the Scott Fish Bowl playoffs. I think they're going to play a factor.
I'm super anxious to see what the final rosters look like and whether they've got kickers on them or not. I feel like they're going to.
I do.
Or maybe it's going to be, maybe it's all going to narrow down to a handful of teams that just hit on all the, lottery tickets, right? And they have no use for kickers because there's going to be 4 rosters left that just nailed everything, because there's so damn many teams in this thing. But I can't wait to see what the final rosters look like.
Do you have any regrets from your team?
I mean, everybody should have certain regrets, I suppose, because we drafted it so early. But when I think about what might have befallen my teams and what has befallen a couple of my teams, right? Like I dodged the J.K. Dobbins thing, and I dodged ETN, and I dodged Cam Akers in this league. So I can't, I haven't had anybody that I took early, suffer injuries that are going to compromise their season. So when that's the case, I feel like I shouldn't express any regrets here, right? Because nothing's happened yet that absolutely torpedoes my season.
No, absolutely. So we're getting into week 1 now. It's 2 days away. I cannot wait. I'm still in that quandary of, do I stay up Thursday night football to watch the Tampa Bay Buccaneers? Because it's 1:30 in the morning, Andy. I've got a very, very important day on Friday with lots of my day job calls scheduled very early morning. So I am in wrestling because I'm a massive Tampa Bay fan. I'm sitting there thinking, it's not often we get to open the season. It's the Cowboys. On the flip side of that, it is 1:30 in the morning. It's going to go on until 5. So do I game part? I don't know. I'm still working that one out, but it is only 2 days away. So as you mentioned, it's been a lot of injuries. Cut week I thought was particularly brutal this season compared to other seasons. So with there being so much flux with just a week or 2 to go, I thought let's talk about some players, situations that are going on right now, and let's help the listeners try and make some sense of these guys who they might have picked up off waiver wires, who they might have drafted as backup guys and then now lead guys, and help them sort of get some clarity as to where their roster is right now. So picked a handful of guys. Let's start with Gus Edwards, because you mentioned J.K. Dobbins. Gus Edwards is now clearly the guy there, with Tyson Williams behind him, and then we don't know who the third is going to be. I guess it could be Lev Bell if they sign him, or Holyfield if he gets the job. We don't know who's. They're working out some guys, because Justice Hill looks like he's out for the season now, and it means there's a lot of workload for Gus Edwards, who's not used to being in this sort of role. So what can our listeners expect from Gus Edwards coming into this season, and where would you project him to go based on what you're expecting from a volume perspective for the season?
Yeah, I think Gus is actually pretty easy. We know the Ravens love him, right? Absolutely love him. They, even last year when J.K. Dobbins was breaking out, they were still running Gus onto the field because he's a good player, good back. He's, obviously not the ceiling that Dobbins has necessarily, but makes nothing but good decisions for that team. So he pretty clearly slots into the J.K. Dobbins role. I think. One thing I think people need to know is that I felt like before the Dobbins injury, I would often hear analysts toss out some workload projections for J.K. Dobbins that were just never going to happen. I'm not calling anybody out or anything like that, but I'd hear people suggest, oh yeah, Dobbins, he's going to get 15 to 20 touches a game, 18 touches a game, something like that. Here's when he was blowing up last season, when he was absolutely erupting and really helping you down the stretch, December football. Here's how many carries he was getting: 11, 13, 14, 11, 13. It's a great rushing offense, right? And you've got Lamar Jackson to worry about, and he's scoring in every game, but he's not catching the ball. They're not going to throw to Gus just as they weren't throwing to Dobbins. I don't buy any of the noise about, oh yeah, we're going to, like, every team is always talking about how they're going to throw it to their talented running backs more. And they've not done it. They don't do it with Lamar, and to Lamar's credit, why should he? If it comes down to it in a scramble situation, Lamar should just run. He's the best runner in the league, So I don't expect them to look to Gus Edwards any more than they ever have in the passing game. So it's gonna be like a dozen or 14 carries a game. And that's fine in this offense because it is a super efficient, incredibly productive run game. But you should not be forecasting, 20 touches a game for Gus Edwards. It's just simply not going to happen. It was never going to happen for J.K. Dobbins. They like Tyson Williams, and he had a phenomenal preseason. And some of his preseason highlights are the best preseason highlights. It was really, really good. So he's going to play too. And I think he slots into the former Gus Edwards role. We know that team wants to run a committee because they've done it. When Mark Ingram was blowing up, it was still a committee. When, Dobbins was blowing up last year, it was still a committee. Like, that's what they want to run. So we have to assume that they're going to continue to do the thing that they've been successful with. So as long as you're not as long as you're drafting and sort of, imagining Gus Edwards to be something like Damian Harris, right? As long as you've taken him in that range and those are your expectations, and you're not thinking that he's going to catch 30 passes, and you're not thinking that he's going to touch the ball 18 times a game, I think you're good. And I think you need to look at him as an RB2 or a flex. I'm almost filibustering on Gus, but I think he's a really interesting player. He's been, over the last week, every day, I like to go into Yahoo leagues, and there's this little transaction trends tag that you can hit, and you can look at who the most traded players are. He's always the most traded player. And I think it's been going on for like a week. And I think that's really interesting because it's, people had injuries and they're looking for anybody they think they can acquire on the cheap. And that it means that we also have other managers who are saying, wow, maybe the time to cash out on Gus is now. And that might be smart, because if there's anybody in your league who thinks that Gus Edwards is suddenly a full workload, 25 touch a game back, you should probably trade him to that team.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you say, J.K. Dobbins was never going to get that role. And it's interesting because everyone thinks that now, there are even people out there that think that, well, J.K. Dobbins wasn't going to get that much workload because Gus Edwards was behind him. But now Gus Edwards is there and Justice Hill has gone down. Yeah. It's like, oh, it's Gus Edwards' season, because no, they like Tyson Williams. As you say, Tyson Williams won the backup job before Justice Hill was ruled out for the season. Like, he won that job. He won it outright. They love him. He is going to get work. I can see a path to getting Williams getting 8 to 10 touches a game on some weeks, because that's going to happen. That is going to be a thing. The same way that Edwards was getting 8 to 10 touches a week some weeks, because that's just how the Ravens roll. They don't ever give all their workload to one guy. And I think you're right. I think, if you're expecting him to be somewhere in that 15 to 20 RB range, I think you're fine. I think if you're expecting him to be an RB1, you're probably going to be disappointed. And if you've paid up for him, like some people have, good luck. I mean, listen, the way I look at it is, if he plays 17 games, you'll probably make whatever you traded away, unless you did something really stupid. But that's a big ask.
If he's going to finish the season as an RB1, it's going to have to be an incredible touchdown season. Like, he's going to have to finish this year with like 18 touchdowns and damn near lead the league, right? Because short of that, he's not going to catch any passes. Like, they're simply not going to throw to running backs.
No, he is basically like 75% of what Mike Davis was last year.
Yeah.
And Mike Davis ran out of steam at the end.
Yes.
Like, he was so bad at the end. And like that's kind of what we're going to get. It's very similar sort of profile and play. But he's a talented player. I love Gus Edwards, but you're just not going to get those really big weeks unless he hits the end zone 3 times, which is, I just don't see it happening, because if they're doing it that much, they're going to pull him, because there isn't that much behind him, and they'll give Williams more work. So I don't think he's got the leash that even J.K. Dobbins would have had, because of the fact it's so thin behind that they're having to work out guys. Let's talk about another one that's I don't want to say benefited from injuries, but who has elevated up the depth chart, and it's Darrell Henderson. So I guess it's a pretty similar conversation to what we've just had about Edwards in terms of Henderson. Or do you think Henderson trends up and potentially has a much better season than Edwards?
No, I don't feel that way. I think Sony Michel is a real problem. I think the Rams identified Sony Michel as somebody they actively wanted. They went and got him. He was on a relatively small workload last year. He's pretty efficient. I think he's a big problem for Henderson. Like, the Rams like Henderson so much that they took away his job in the middle of last season, right? And they'd previously identified Cam Akers as the guy that they wanted to play over Henderson. And like, even when Henderson was at his best and was helping us last year, he never played more than 56% of the snaps in any game. So it's not like he's on the field the whole time. It's not like he was ever going to be a full workload guy necessarily. And I just think Michel is enough of a threat. Of course, Michel has to stay healthy, and that's probably not going to happen for 17 games. But maybe if he's in a committee, right? If he's in a situation where he's getting, 45% of the handoff, something like that, maybe he can stay healthy through that situation. I think it's a real problem for Henderson, and for anybody who drafted Henderson thinking that they had locked down RB2 with somebody who was getting 18 to 20 touches a week. I'm super skeptical of that.
No, but I actually weirdly think Michel helps them out. I think he helps Henderson out, and I think that, as you mentioned, the health thing, because Henderson's health hasn't always been fantastic, right. And I think the fact that there is a really capable guy behind Henderson means that I think it was a good thing for Henderson, because I think if Henderson was going to get 18 to 20 touches, he doesn't play 17 games. He blows up, because that's what he has done. Unfortunately, there's no question he's got talent. There's no question that he can produce. But I think, as you say, if he sticks around that 50, 55, maybe even 60%, let's say gives a small boost and he gets 60% workload, I think as an owner, you should be fairly happy with that, because he's never going to completely burn out. And I think he is someone who can't be a burn.
That's a really reasonable take. And, that is actually probably, you're probably expressing the best case scenario for Henderson, which is as you like, there's a half dozen guys in the league who are legitimately going to see like full workloads, like every touch they can possibly handle. Like it goes down to like Najee Harris and Joe Mixon, and then like that's it. There's like seriously, there's like a half dozen, and I think you're like, it's just hard to make it through an entire season or even most of the season on that sort of workload. And Henderson that was probably never going to happen for him. And I suppose you're right. If this makes him a 13 touch guy and they're able to get 16 or 17 games out of him, that's probably better than what might have happened if they'd entered the season saying, well, we just hope he can stay healthy on 25 touches and 80% of the snaps.
Yeah. And then I think as well, that makes Michel relevant. I'm not as confident that he's going to be uber relevant. I think he's a flex play, maybe a running back 3, but I think he will be relevant. I think he'll have games, especially games where the Rams maybe get up early and they think, right, we're just going to give Sony the ball. I still think Jake Funk probably gets a little bit of work here. I think they're going to spread it out a bit. Yeah, I think, again, similar to Edwards, this guy, I think he's low. I think he's bottom end of the RB2. I think he gets there if he stays healthy. But again, I think if you were drafting him in the 5th round, 6th round, you're probably okay with that. Because your choices at that stage were you could shoot high and go Sermon, and maybe you miss out on that. Maybe you don't. Who knows? That depends on how you feel about Sermon. But then after that, it's Fournette, Rojo. It's all the David Johnson. Like, I'd have Henderson over any of those guys. So I think if you didn't reach for him, you're probably going to be quite happy with, as long as he stays fit, with how it's gone. And I think the Michel trade helps. I really do.
I will say I think Darrell Henderson is where we get into that running back dead zone conversation, where it's not so much, it's not. We know that a bunch of running backs are going to fail, and they're going to fail in the first round. They're going to fail in the dead zone. They're going to fail late. Like they're going to get hurt and they're going to fail. It's the opportunity cost. There are the receivers that you pass on when you're taking Henderson. Last year, the running back dead zone is where you could have gotten DK Metcalf and where you could have gotten Stephon Diggs. And those guys were, if not league winners, they were darn close to it. Right. And Henderson's not going to be that. Like that to me, that upside just does not exist for a lot of the guys in this range. I think David Montgomery was maybe like the lone hit from that sort of round 4 through 7 range among the running backs last year. It was a big hit. But the wide receivers were actually like among the very best in the game. So off the top of my head, I like Chase Claypool or Henderson. I want Claypool. I want a guy who I can imagine a scenario where they break out in such a legendary way that they become league winners like Diggs did last year.
Yeah, I think that makes complete sense, and with you on that. Chasing to a guy who's probably just elevated himself out of the RB dead zone, but he was certainly there at the start of the season. James Robinson. Now, I don't know about you. I feel very confident that James Robinson is going to be a high-end RB2, maybe with the upside of being an RB1, especially in this offense. But how do you feel about Robinson?
Yeah, I've got him. I mean, he was basically my favorite story last year.
Yeah.
A wonderful player. I have no idea how he ended up at Illinois State, where he was. I mean, he was just a legendary. Like he was an Illinois high school legend. He was terrific at the collegiate level, at a lower level, and then he was just. It's so rare for somebody in a bad offense to produce week to week consistently at a high level like he did last year. It just almost, we see it with Jaguars running backs from time to time, right? Like Maurice Jones-Drew used to do it, and in seasons where the Jags would average like 14 points a game, he would score a touchdown a game. It was amazing. And Robinson had that kind of year. So a really fun story. I think he's not quite one of those full workload guys, only because you can't convince me that Urban Meyer is going to be the first NFL head coach who doesn't give Carlos Hyde 150 touches. It just always happens, right? And like sometimes he's fine. He was fine in Houston a couple of years ago, and it works. There's no way that Urban Meyer is gonna give all of the touches to Robinson and none of them to Hyde, because it's just, we've never seen it in the NFL. Like Andy Reid had to trade Hyde away in order to resist the temptation of giving him 10 touches a game. It is just something that NFL coaches do. So I think he's going to be a little bit of an annoyance throughout the season, but I think there's a pretty clear path here for Robinson to always see at least 15 touches. And I've got him both entering week 1 and for the full season. I've got him in the same range that you described, sort of that fringy RB1, very high end RB2.
Yeah, and I think for me, Robinson will have the high value touches. So, I did some research on the Jags, especially the spread offense, but even last year, the reason they kept running the ball is because it was the only way they could net positive get yards. Like, when they had 6 or fewer defenders in the box defending the run, they went for 6.3 yards per carry. On RPOs, they went for 6.2 yards per play. Back screens, they had 33, which led the NFL. They gained 8.2 yards per play. They were bottom of the league, or bottom 5 team in the league in play action, but when they did it, they were 7 yards per play. Now they got Trevor Lawrence. They're going to be doing all of these things. And I think that's where Robinson, because he's already done it. Like, all of these are going to come into play. The RPOs, the play actions, the back screens. Urban Meyer's going to love all of that. I think he's going to get all that high volume work, all that high value work. Yeah, I think Hyde is going to get a lot of the 1st and 10, almost like the donkey yards, like the donkey touches, the ones that you've got to carry, and the hard yards, and the stuff inside, maybe the stuff inside their own 20. That kind of work is the work I see Hyde getting. He's not a guy I really want on a fantasy roster unless I'm in a super deep league for that reason. But I think all those really high positive explosive plays, I think they're the ones Robinson cashes in on.
Yeah, I just think it's going to be one of those situations where, they're going to try to hide onto the field 1 out of every 3 series, and fantasy Twitter is going to erupt over it, but you're just going to have to get used to it, because it's definitely going to happen. But it doesn't, like, again, there's so few guys that get full workloads that's fine. If James Robinson is getting 2/3 of the backfield touches, that's amazing, and he's gonna be in for a great season. They're one of the teams that I'm, it's not a particularly attractive opening week matchup, right? It's like the Jags and Texans, and nobody really wants to watch that, but learning what the Jags are going to be this year is super fun, because it's, on the one hand, you think about the possibilities of an Urban Meyer offense with a bunch of really fun players, and you're like, wow, I'm ready for that. And then you look at the rest of the coaching staff, and it's like, there's Brian Schottenheimer's in there, and Darrell Bevel's in there, and you're like, oh man, I've seen this film before, and no thank you. And so what's the blend of those coaches going to look like? I have no idea. I'm ready for it.
Well, I kind of now I don't love Urban Meyer as a Florida Gator fan. I don't love Urban Meyer at all. But I have jumped on the deep end here, and I write a stream column for us, and I put the Jags defense in there. I just think that Houston is such a hot mess. And I think the fact that the Jags you're going to have this high of, yes, okay, the fan support in Jacksonville is not great. That's why they try and play 2 games in London, because they do struggle to sell out. But they've never had Trevor Lawrence before. They've never had Urban Meyer. There's so much buzz in Jacksonville right now for this team, more than at least the last decade. Even when they went to the AFC title game, there's more buzz now than there was then. Then you've got this car crash that is Houston. It's just like, you can't tell me that the Jaguars aren't going to get two turnovers in that game. I can just see it now. I can see they're going to get Tyrod on the run with that poor offensive line, with that backfield that nobody knows there's anything going to happen. And then the wide receiver core, it's Brandon Cooks and who knows, Anthony Miller, Nico Collins, a couple of guys, who knows? I mean, I just think it's an absolute car crash. I cannot wait. I'm gonna watch that game with great intent, not just to see what Jacksonville do. I'm also curious just to see how bad Houston are going to be, because I can't see where they're going to win a lot of games this year.
No, it's a really good point. We're probably going to be picking on the Texans offense all year in terms of like defense streaming, for sure.
100%. I think that when I looked it up and they're like 1.9% owned, I was like, yeah, I'll be having the Jags. Let's move on to some exciting players now. Let's talk first of all about Trey Lance. Do we think he starts week 1? Because Shanahan's been very coy here. Do we think he's got a shot to start week 1? Do you think he starts week 1? Do we think it's going to be soon?
I will say I don't think this idea that we'll see both quarterbacks in the same game. That
No.
it's probably not going to happen. But I'm not totally ruling it out either. It's hugely disruptive, right? And colleges only do it because they don't have any good quarterbacks, right? So we rarely see a situation where a team just has two great quarterbacks that they have full faith in, and they rotate them. It wouldn't shock me if they have either sub packages for Lance, and there's situations in which he's on the field where he has a Taysom Hillish role. Or it wouldn't shock me, I suppose, if Garoppolo has a really short leash. They just have such a no game in the NFL is a layup, and it's a road game. But it's Detroit, and it is really difficult to imagine like the Niners at full strength having big problems with the Detroit Lions. Like if they do, then the Niners are just not who we assume they are. I don't think we're going to see a ton of them in Week 1. It'd be super exciting if we did. I doubt that we will, but they do have to get to him. Because it's the whole advantage of having a good quarterback that you believe in on a rookie contract, especially one that you've traded all this draft capital for. That guy's got to start pretty soon. And they've already, the team has already been in a situation where Jimmy Garoppolo missed a bunch of throws in a Super Bowl, and like maybe no one individual cost you a win, but a better quarterback and they win that game. I know that. And so they got to get to Lance at some point. I don't know that it happens in Week 1, but it surely has to happen by or before October. I feel the same way about Justin Fields, by the way. And I honestly, I think that if Fields would have just sat out the year last year, he might have been drafted in Lance's position, because nobody paid a penalty for sitting out the year. And I think the Bears have to get to Fields as quickly as possible. I don't hate that it's not happening against the Rams, but I think they probably get to him very early in the season as well. And I think both of these guys, again, because of the inadequacies in fantasy scoring at quarterback, they both have a chance to make a huge impact because they are gifted runners, and there's enough in each receiving core to support a pretty healthy passing game as well.
Yeah, and I think the advantage with San Francisco is their bye is very early, Week 6.
Yeah.
I cannot see Lance not starting Week 7. So it's just, is he going to start before the bye? Is he going to start after the bye? I never really bought into the fact he was going to play Week 1 until Shanahan has still not named the starter and we're 5 days away. And that makes me think, I think you're trying to take the pressure off your new quarterback by not making it a thing, by just dropping it so late in the game that people don't have the time to react. Or it's that slow burn of, well, people are expecting it now because you haven't named Garoppolo. It's got to be Lance. And it's like, when it happens, like, yeah, of course it's Lance. And it's like everyone's kind of already subscribed to it. I don't know.
There's a weird sort of risk for the Niners in that their early season schedule is ostensibly so friendly that they could race out to like a 5. But what are you going to do? You're going to bench Garoppolo off a 5-0 start or something like that? Like that gets really hard to do. And again, I think they have to get to Lance as quickly as possible. Like that organizationally, they made the quarterback decision. Like when they traded all those picks for Trey Lance, the decision was made. We know who's going to finish the season as the Niners quarterback. It's a disaster if Lance doesn't. Unless they're undefeated, right? Like that's the only circumstance in which it's okay for Lance not to be the quarterback at the end of the season. So they got to get there somehow. You make a really good point that immediately after an early bye would be, it can't go later than that.
No. So let's look at the Saints. So we'll take both of these guys together, Jameis Winston and Marquez Callaway, because this is something that I kind of all season, all preseason, since the Super Bowl, I pretty much always said, Breeze is done, Winston's coming in, and Thomas gets hurt. And I think, well, they're not signing anyone. Not so sure they're going to put Winston out there with a bunch of no names to go out there and throw the football because he's not the most accurate at the best of times. And then you can not give him anyone who's proven that they can catch the ball successfully at a high degree of success rate frequently. And then Marquez Callaway comes along, has probably one of the best preseasons I've ever seen of a wide receiver, where he's come from absolutely nothing to now he's like 75% owned and everybody knows who he is. And they're talking about him as a potential wide receiver too. I don't know if I see that, but thoughts on these two and what we could expect out of them for the season, because it's obviously a long road, and it doesn't look like Thomas is going to play for at least a couple of months.
This is another one of those teams, along with the Jaguars, that I can't wait to watch. Right? Like there's so many variables here. There's so many things that we just don't know what it's going to look like. The limiting factor for Winston, a couple limiting factors for him. One is the Thomas injury, which there's no chance that that's going to be like, what if we don't see Michael Thomas until December? That's definitely in play. Yeah, I mean, like he's not a lock to play when first available. It's a tricky injury. Like we're certainly not going to see him until November, and that's just an eternity. Like you can't even. You might as well throw him out of your plans, right? Like this is the time of year when everybody's like, "Oh, I'm going to stash this guy, and he's going to be a superstar when he comes back." But that's just forever. Like if if things don't go your way in the first 9 weeks of the season, which they may not, then it's not going to matter that you've saved Michael Thomas for this stretch run. No. So, if we just sort of toss him out entirely, I will say that Callaway looks like. I mean, he looks like a star. It would surprise me at some level because there's a Tennessee roster that had Alvin Kamara and Marquez Callaway and like Preston Williams and just like Dobbs, like an NFL quarterback, and they went all the way to the Music City Bowl. I don't what the hell has Tennessee been doing with all their talent over the years? I don't see anything wrong with Callaway, right? Like he's made sensational plays. You look at the athletic profile; it's great. He seems like somebody who has followed the sort of normal learning curve for an NFL receiver and is ready to break out. And I don't see any reason why he isn't I mean, he sure looks like the overwhelming number one receiver on this team and somebody that we can expect either wide receiver 2 or pretty high end wide receiver 3 numbers for. I've got him ranked as a pretty solid wide receiver 3 right now. I haven't seen any faults this preseason. It's been incredible. Jameis, I mean, everybody knows the scouting report on Jameis, right? He had one of the weirdest, great, bad seasons of all time a couple of years ago. Yeah. I mean, a 30 touchdown, 30 pick season is wild. 5,000 yards is wild. Not that that's gonna happen in New Orleans, but he's had 2 years now of Sean Payton coaching him, a year and a half of Sean Payton coaching him. That's good. He's been the understudy to Drew Brees. That's good. Everybody knows he's had the corrective eye surgery. That's good. Like I can build a case to be pretty excited about Jameis. And then the other thing is that he'll actually go downfield, whereas Brees had to really pick his spots to take downfield shots when he was, in his final years there. And he did it well because defenses never expected him to go downfield basically in any of the last 3 seasons. And so it was hugely successful when he did. And we just naturally expect Jameis to take 6, 7 deep shots a game. So that's pretty fun. And he's got a receiver who can make things happen. And he's also the guy who gets to throw to Alvin Kamara. So that's exciting too. So I'm going to be surprised if Jameis playing a full year doesn't give us 4,400 passing yards, something like that. He could sniff 30 passing touchdowns. I don't those seem like crazy numbers, but I'm not sure that's enough to make him a QB1, but it's going to make him a really streamable quarterback. And then you're just going to be, you're going to have to deal with the annoyance of Taysom Hill in goal-to-go situations.
So that leads me on to my point. Do you see a scenario where Taysom Hill wins this job back?
It's a really good question. I guess things could go horribly wrong. I mean, can I imagine a scenario where Jameis has a couple of 3 interception games early in the season and they, that's definitely in play. That is absolutely in play. I don't root for it. I want to see Jameis as successful. But that's certainly a possibility. If you told me that in 3 weeks when I write the pickups column, I'm leading with Taysom Hill, sure, that could absolutely happen.
I've watched every game Jameis Winston's ever played as a Tampa fan, and I was there in London when he threw 5 picks. Jameis Winston's biggest problem is Jameis Winston. That's his biggest problem, is himself. He gets into this Superman mode where he's like, I have to win the game on my own. He thinks he's Michael Jordan when he's not.
Yeah.
And he takes the game, and everyone talks about the fact that off that 5,000-yard season that Tom Brady came in, and that's the reason they got rid of Jameis. The reason they got rid of Jameis was because of how he finished the season. He made the same mistakes in week 17 as he did in week 5. Like, he didn't learn. He continued to make the same throws, the same bad reads, the same mistakes. And that's where he's going to get in trouble. And I think he had 5 years. He had his first 4 years were haphazard coaching at best. With Dirk Cutter, he had some terrible coaching. There's no doubt in my mind that he could have landed somewhere else and probably been quite a successful player had he had stable, successful coaching. But, he's had 4 different offensive coordinators. He's had 4 different head coaches. I think at some point, he's only had like 18 months with each one. He's not had a long, stable career.
Yeah.
That's my worry. Some of it's all going to mishmash in there, as you would expect. That's my only worry with Jameis. And then I think if that happens, Callaway falls off a cliff, because Taysom Hill's not going to throw the ball downfield. We've seen this story with Breeze. That's my only concern. But I'm with you. I think Callaway can
and
do
Taysom was mostly terrible for Alvin Kamara too. I know that Kamara got going in like the final game with Taysom Hill at quarterback, but that was super worrisome because Kamara was on pace to break, McCaffrey's single season reception record by a running back, and then he just absolutely fell off during the Hill weeks.
Yeah. No one wants that. No one wants Taysom Hill. End of. Let's talk about quickly 2 more. Detroit Lions and just their wide receiver core. I just put all of them in because, let's be honest, they have the argument of probably the worst wide receiver core I can remember in the NFL. I mean, you're talking about Tyrell Williams is arguably the one. Amon-Ra St. Brown, the rookie, is the 2. They've just traded for a Denver special teams guy to potentially come on and play. They signed him after a half decent offseason where he's been on the practice squad for a couple of years. They cut Brashard Perriman, which wasn't that much of a surprise, given that he only really turns up in the final 4 games of seasons when it's time for him to get a new contract. To watch that. I've seen this movie. I watched it in Cleveland. I watched it in
Tampa.
Denver.
Again, yeah.
No, it's true.
Yeah.
I saw it in Cleveland. He had pretty poor for 12 games. Final 4 games, phenomenal. Gets himself $4 million from Tampa. Does nothing for 12 games. Turns up for the final 4. It's what Brashard Perriman does. He did it at the Jets. Everywhere he goes, it's just he doesn't turn up for the first 3 quarters of the season, and he turns up at the end because he needs a paycheck. He's now at the Bears, so I wish you all the best for Brashard Perriman and what he achieves. But let's get to Detroit. What do we do with Detroit and Tyrell Williams and company? I mean, do we really expect them to roll the season with this, or are they just thinking, well, we're not going to win many games anyway, so why invest the money? Let's just roll it over to next year. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm glad that you opened as bold as you did, because that is how I feel. I feel like this is the worst wide receiver room that I've seen in the time that I've been covering fantasy, right? I don't remember a group of wide receivers that was worse than this. I'm not somebody who's like, somebody's gonna have 600 yards, right? Because they're like Jared Goff's gonna throw for at least 3,600, something like that, and somebody's gonna lead this team in receiving, and somebody's gonna finish with 650 yards and 5 touchdowns, something like that. I wasn't a huge fan of St. Brown. Those USC receivers generally didn't do it for me the way they do it for some people. So I'm not a big fan of his. We sort of know the Tyrell Williams story. He might have a big game at some point. He might have 2 big games at some point. It's almost certainly not going to be consistent. I think Hawkinson is a huge talent. I think he's great, and I think in a different team, I could imagine ranking TJ Hawkinson as like a top 3 tight end. I think he pretty comfortably, as long as he stays healthy, leads this team in receiving. He's the only member of this receiving core that we need to care about. And like, I'm in, I'm in a 16 team league where no Lions receiver is rostered right now. Maybe somebody will make a claim for Williams, but it's not going to be me. There's some bad players on rosters in that league, and there's no Lions receivers. So it's got to be, you've got to play in like a 14 team league with like 3 wide receiver spots, 3 flexes, or it's got to be like an 18 or 20 team league before I'm super interested in having one of these Lions receivers. Because again, I don't think it's going to be maybe I'd love to be wrong. I love it when rookies pop and become stars. I don't think that's going to be the case with St. Brown, and there's just not a Lions receiver that I want to talk people into. Like sometimes I feel like my job as a fantasy analyst is like hype man. But there's just nobody in the Lions receiving core that I really want to talk you into.
I mean, I write my stream column every week and waiver wire column, and I try and keep it to 30% ownership or less. And so I have Tyrell Williams in there as an ad because he's under 30% owned. Purely as a speculation, I put it in there that, look, he's a wide receiver 1 on his team. It probably isn't going to go well, but I think how often are you going to get a wide receiver 1 who's less than 20% owned in leagues? I just think, do you know what? If you've got to if you've just had to dump Etienne or you've had to dump Dobbins and you're looking at the waiver wire, you're not feeling overly infused with what's on there. I always say that there are plenty of guys. Tyson Williams should be owned. James White should be owned. There's a lot of guys up there. I would put Russell Gage up there as someone I would own before Tyrell Williams. But you know what? If you're in your waiver wire is really thin, it's been decimated over the last couple of weeks. You're late to the party. You're drafting in other leagues, or you just decided you were going to turn up now, and all the good waiver claims are gone. I just think, why not? Just add Tyrell Williams. It's probably not going to work, but he's a wide receiver 1. If he ends up getting like 10 targets because there's no one else to throw to, because they decide they're just going to double cover Hawkinson and just go, do you know what? We know Hawkinson's the only guy with talent. We'll just single cover Tyrell Williams. Just if he beats us, he beats us.
Yeah, I write our pickups column as well, and he was the last name that I wrote about. But I wrote about him because I felt, for the same reasons that you're expressing, I felt just compelled to say, well, I mean, this guy's clearly at the top of the hierarchy for whatever that means. And you're right. Like, there are people out there who just lost Dobbins, just lost ETN, and they have a gaping hole in a flex spot somewhere. And I get it. And can he give us 5 catches reliably for somewhere between 55 and 75 yards? That's definitely in play. And if that is, what you're shooting for with that flex spot, like he's there for you.
Listen, if he gets 555 and 1, that's wide receiver 3 numbers.
Yeah, right.
I don't expect it to work. The way I look at it is, if you're desperate, there's worse options out there. But you are having to scrape the barrel.
Which should not be all you're aiming for heading into week 1 with nobody on bye and all these flyers out there. Yeah.
But you never know. He might come out of the blocks, have a 174 and 2 game, and all of us will be sat there going, "Oh man, we didn't see that."
If that happens, you should definitely add and trade him, because that is the peak of Williams' season.
Yeah, he's never doing that again. Last player, most controversially, Deshaun Watson. Do you think he plays this season? Do we think he gets traded? We haven't heard from the commissioner's office and what they're going to do. What do you do with Deshaun Watson right now?
This is one of those tough things, because it's you hate to. I mean, at every turn, you hate to trivialize what he's been accused of by giving fantasy spin on Deshaun Watson, right? It's just a horrible story. I'm surprised that I fully believe the reporting from Charles Robinson about Miami still being all in on Deshaun Watson and wanting him and being willing to put multiple firsts on the table and all that. Like, I get it. Just as a pure talent, Watson is certainly worth multiple firsts. So I don't doubt that there's still trade interest in him. I have to say, I'm not sure if the league feels limited in what they can do before there's been any legal judgment against him anywhere. It's going to be wild if they just make him inactive and don't dress him for the bulk of the season. It sure doesn't seem like there's any path to him having any fantasy relevance in Houston. That seems pretty clearly to be done. But I guess I would hold open the door for the possibility of a trade to, if it's not Miami, they maybe Houston just decides they have to move on because it is so weird not playing, your best quarterback, and they finally accept a lesser offer than what's been reported. So is there a path for him to finish the season as the Dolphins starting quarterback or something like that, or that maybe the Eagles get back into this thing again? I have no idea. I suppose that's possible until the league actually takes action and suspends him, or otherwise, limits his ability to get on the field. That's all in play. I can tell you that I don't have him anywhere, and maybe some of that was just a subconscious reaction to the allegations against him, and some of it is just there's such a level of uncertainty here, and there's so many great quarterback prospects that why would I hold on to this guy as my flyer, as my little lottery ticket, when I can, I have leagues that I've gone into and said, okay, I'm going to stash Justin Fields or Trey Lance, and then I'm just going to play Sam Darnold or play matchups for the first, 6 weeks, 3 weeks, whatever it is of the season. I could have done that with Deshaun Watson, and I haven't done it. It'll be mildly surprising to me if he plays this year. It's such a bad look for the team that starts him, and for the team that gives up actual assets to acquire him. I'll be a little surprised if he plays.
See, I just think Houston will have to play him at some point. Unless the commissioner's office comes in and takes the situation out of their hands, because when you lose to Jacksonville, I'm not saying that's definitely going to happen, but I'm pretty confident it's going to happen. And then you're going to lose to a 1-win team from last year, if that happens. And then you go and lose, and you go 0-3 and 0-4 and 0-5. Let's not forget, they don't have a Justin Fields, a Trey Lance, a Trevor Lawrence. And you go, okay, well, look, we're learning. They got Tyrod Taylor. We know what Tyrod Taylor is in the league. I'm not dissing Tyrod Taylor. He's a starting level, low-end starting level quarterback. I can't knock him for what he has done in the league, but he is what he is. He's like Trevor Bridge. No, Teddy Bridgewater. They're not guys that are going to sell seats. They're not going to sell seats in the stadium. They're not going to get people watching the team. And I think, if they start 0-3, 0-4, 0-5, and the commissioner's office has not stepped in, or Watson hasn't even been deposed, and if he still hasn't been deposed, you have to play this innocent until proven guilty element out a little bit. I can see a path where he has to play, because if not, the Texans are they're going to render him as such a low asset. They can't sit there and say, we want multiple first-round picks, but yet we're going to sit him no matter what. That's not how it works. You're going to have to put him in the window, and that means he's going to have to play.
Yeah,
if you want to get something for him.
It's pure speculation, but you have to think that the Texans are just begging the league to take some sort of disciplinary action against him, right? Because
100%. Yeah,
it seems like an untenable situation to just have your obviously best quarterback inactive yet still eligible to play. And it also seems untenable to start a guy who's facing the kind of allegations that he's facing. It's an impossible riddle. I understand Houston wanting to be rid of him, and I understand them wanting to hold out for the highest possible return. I can't believe they haven't already taken an offer from Miami if it's out there. I don't know who else is bidding.
Well, it's going to work itself out one way or the other, and it's going to be soon, I hope. And we don't want to trivialize what he's done, but we'll see what happens with Watson. I think if you've owned him, I think you've taken him. I said to people, if you're drafting him, and look, I took him to the Scott Fish Bowl on the hunch that I thought he'd miss 8 games minimum.
Yeah.
Because I just thought in that sort of tournament, I'm not trivializing what he did. I'd be happy to cut him tomorrow if he's guilty. and wash my hands of it. Whatever. My 10th round pick doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things. But I think that if I took him with the knowledge of I'm counting him out for 8 games minimum, like, because I think the league do step in. I think they will give him some form. I think they just have to. I think they have to, even if they do it by week 2 and it's a 6-game suspension. I think that, and you know, it doesn't have to be his only suspension. It can just be based on, you know, how he's brought the league into disrepute. We're going to give you the 6 games, and then we'll see how we get. And that buys the league time. And I think the Texans, the league, everyone just wants a bit of time, because this is going to be front and center Sunday when he sat there on the sideline, dressed or not dressed. He's going to be there. The cameras are going to be on him.
Right.
No one wants that situation. Not the league, not Texans, certainly not Deshaun Watson, his family, the victims. No one wants that.
Yep.
So someone's going to have to step in. So hopefully they do that. Final question for me, and appreciate your time here massively, is do you have a spicy hot take for this season? Anything that is radical that we deemed as out there in terms of a fantasy take for this season?
Yeah, I've talked myself into it. I mentioned him earlier. I've talked myself into a scenario where the Pittsburgh Steelers just decide that they're going to feed more targets and more opportunities to one of the best athletes in the last 20 or 30 years in the NFL, and they really funnel the chances to Chase Claypool. I feel like he's a guy, like, it's basically just Chase Claypool and Calvin Johnson in the entire history of pro days and the combine, who measure in at like 6'4" and 230 plus, who have that level of speed, that vertical leap, who just have this incredibly rare combination of physical gifts. It's Claypool and Calvin Johnson, which is, if you're going to be in a club of 2 and the other guy is Calvin Johnson, you're pretty good. 72 touches I think he had last year, and like 11 of them became touchdowns. And I feel like there's one school of thought that will look at that and say, oh, well, he's due for touchdown regression. There's no way that's happening again. But another way to look at that is the Pittsburgh Steelers could just say, okay, Ben's another year removed from elbow surgery and his arm's a little stronger and he's a little better. And wow, what would happen if we gave Chase Claypool 150 opportunities? And so I have him every place I can get him. I have bet him to lead the NFL in receiving touchdowns, because he's at BetMGM. He's like plus 8,000 or something like that. It's a great return. He just strikes me as the one guy who will get to the end of the season and Claypool will have blown up, and more of us will be thinking, wow, why didn't we see that coming? He kind of blew up last year. Why didn't we see the full eruption coming this year? Like, I think that's very much in play. So I've tried to get as much Chase Claypool as I possibly can.
Amazing. Love that take. Although my Deontay Johnson shares don't love that quite so much. But I'm with you. I look at, it's interesting because I look at that scenario in Pittsburgh and it's like, you're projecting Claypool, Johnson, Juju, all to be top 24, top 26 wide receivers. Yet we're projecting Ben to be quarterback 16, quarterback 17. I mean, both of those things.
I've talked about this a bit. There were seasons in the past where we'd rank Matt Ryan as like the QB 15, but we had Roddy White and Julio Jones both in the top 10, and like Tony Gonzalez was like top 6 among tight ends, and there's just no way. Like, it's really hard for those two things to happen, right? So like, you may not think you believe in Ben Roethlisberger, but if you have ranked 3 Steelers wide receivers, like as wide receiver 2s, it turns out you do believe in Ben Roethlisberger.
100%. Although I do think if any one of those 3 is to drop out, it will be Juju, because I think he's the guy that could be the odd one out. But we'll wait and see what happens. Andy, I really appreciate your time and everything you've given to our listeners. Tell everyone from Rush Nation where they can find you and interact with you.
First of all, this has been a real pleasure. It was great interacting with you throughout the Fishbowl draft, and really enjoy the opportunity to be on here. They can obviously find me on Yahoo Sports. I'm just at Andy Behrens on Twitter. They can listen to the Yahoo Fantasy Football Forecast. That's our pod. But again, it's super fun to do the show. Great to see you.
Well, I really appreciate it. I'm humbled that you're here. I know our listeners have absolutely loved it. I'd love to have you back on when the season's done. And one of us will be gloating, I hope, having lifted the fishbowl trophy. I hope it's me. You're going to hope it's you. But, I mean, we had a UK winner 2 years ago in Gary Haddow, although he's changed his allegiance to America now. So I guess that means that the Brit hasn't won it because he's given up his, well, I don't think he's given up his passport, but we'll see what happens. But as always, appreciate you coming on. And Rush Nation, this has been a great show. We've had a great few shows, and do you know what? You're not going to have to wait too long for the next one because the Dynasty guys are going live in about 8 minutes time. So if you haven't had enough football, you can just stay right on the channel. They're going live in about 8 minutes. Tomorrow, we're going to be premiering the 5-yard game show. I cannot wait for that. It's a crazy concept. You know I love a crazy concept, so that will be there. So tune in to that one. But until later on, don't forget, Rush Nation, keep rushing.